note of welcome also to Warsaw. This is a place I've come to know a little over the last few years, and I've also had the advantage of having a great guide with Andrew Roche, who's taking me to some of the more interesting parts of Warsaw and some of the places where you end up late at night. So I can know from my experience that it's a lively and interesting city. What I wanted to talk about today, I think, was Omidyar network, the work we do in transparency and accountability, and also the way in which we may be able to galvanize action towards moving this sector forward, particularly in this region, particularly as part of a worldwide effort to get better open government, transparency and accountability. So what I wanted to try and do was to talk about three things. I'm going to talk about Omidyar network and our work worldwide, but particularly to focus on transparency and accountability, and why we see this region as important in our work. Also wanted to talk about 4 issues we care about and why we think these issues are important in terms of moving this sector forward, and particularly at this moment in time. And then also to finish off with some calls for action for what we may do now to try and move this sector forward. So I'm going to see whether I can get the... Okay. So Pierre Omidyar, who, as many of you know, is the founder of eBay, which is the world's largest online auction site, set up Omidyar Network as a philanthropic investment firm in 2004. And that's a kind of an unusual term. It's a kind of hybrid term between a venture capital firm and also a philanthropic foundation. And Pierre's experience at eBay had led him to believe that individuals are intrinsically able to create opportunity for themselves. And every person, if given opportunity, has the power to make a difference. So based on this belief, we both invest in for-profit businesses which have a social impact, and we also make grants to organizations who also are moving their sectors forward. And we believe that that investment in individuals, investment in empowering them and empowering their societies will ultimately help achieve our goals. To date, we've invested about $500 million worth of capital, both in for-profit businesses and in non-profit organizations. And it's worked out about 50-50. There's been no design there. It's just these are the kind of initiatives we found, these are the kind of businesses we've supported, and these are the kind of non-profit organizations we've supported. And we find that there's 4 main levers which we try and apply to try and achieve social impact. The one, of course, is financial capital, those investments in debt and equity, and also the investments in grants in organizations. But just as important is an investment in what we call human capital, supporting the organizations with additional services, helping them on boards, helping them with their governance, their management, having more of a kind of high-touch involvement in those organizations to help them improve and to help them move forward. The third area which we think is important and which we're placing a greater emphasis on now is what we call intellectual capital, or the power of ideas. So we're also supporting organizations and coalitions which are working on issues like freedom of information, issues like anti-corruption, issues like global open data standards, and trying to get people galvanized around action on these particular issues. And we're also becoming more involved in some of the international initiatives as well. And I'll talk a little bit later about the Open Government Partnership and some of the work we've been doing there and some of the promise that holds as well. And then finally, the 4th lever which we're talking about is network. So part of Omidyar network is about getting those organizations who are working together to work together more effectively, leveraging the expertise they may have in one particular area and sharing that with others. So the network issue is a really important lever for us to try and move these sectors forward. We're investing in a number of initiative areas: financial inclusion, providing people with access to capital, a focus on base of the pyramid entrepreneurship, so looking at products and services which will help support poorer communities. Given our eBay heritage, we're interested, of course, in consumer internet and mobile plays, opportunities for people to connect around common interests, and also property rights. So this is a really important issue, particularly for women in the developing world, to give them access to land title, which will in itself potentially help them with access to capital. But what I wanted to talk about particularly today was our work in transparency and accountability. And as Andrew said, we are putting a far greater emphasis on this as part of our overall mission. Because we believe That in order to provide people with kind of economic opportunity, you also need to provide them with political and social opportunity as well. So it's as important to create empowered individuals who also work within fair, free and effective societies if you want to see social change happen. And obviously, given our heritage in eBay, we're interested in how technology can scale. So with all of the investments and the grants that we make, we're particularly interested in the way in which technology can aggregate information, how people are able to use technology to share information more effectively than perhaps they could have done 4 or 5 years ago, how that provides people with platforms also through which they can hold their leaders accountable. So this is a DNA which runs through all of our work in transparency and accountability, is the way in which technology can affect change. Then why Central and Eastern Europe? Obviously, you'd expect me to say that standing here on a platform in Poland. But I think what we've noticed is that as Owen has developed a global practice, there's some central areas of activity, vibrancy, and activity, and a momentum that are starting to emerge around the world. And we believe that this region is one of those areas of vibrancy and momentum. When we looked at developing a global program for Omidyar Network's Transparency and Accountability Initiative, and I should say that we're relative newcomers to this field. We only started making investments in transparency and accountability in 2006 when we supported the Sunlight Foundation. And only since 2009 have we invested outside the US. So we're still learning, we're still exploring. Well, when we looked at what the landscape looked like, we thought about which countries would have more traction, which would have more momentum, and where would we likely to see more opportunities for success. And as we went around the world, we looked at a range of different indices and a range of different characteristics. We were looking for large populations. We were looking for a technology readiness and a technology penetration. We're also looking for a relatively free press, a relative active civil society, some sense with the government that there is a responsiveness to citizens, some sense that there is a momentum. So, we're not going to be working in North Korea or Eritrea. We're going to be looking in countries where there is a relatively active civic movement and where there are the seeds and the foundations to try and build on those. So when we looked at Southeast Asia, we looked at Indonesia and the Philippines. When we looked at Latin America, we looked at Brazil and to Mexico. And when we thought about this region, it was Poland, it was Ukraine, and it was Turkey that we thought fitted all of those different characteristics. Now, that's not to say that there are other countries, of course, in this region which are equally vibrant, which have that kind of momentum behind them. And of course, there are many good examples of innovation that have come out of many other countries within the region. But in terms of the investments we wanted to start making, it was in Poland and it was in Ukraine and Turkey. And I'm really delighted that we've been able to support the Państwo Foundation and also a number of other organizations in Ukraine and Poland as well. I think also the important thing that made us think carefully about this region as well was the technology expertise. And you know better than I do that there is great expertise in Romania and Ukraine and others, that the developers that come from this region succeed in other parts of the world as well. So that was important for us in terms of seeing what were the conditions for greater momentum and traction. So there's kind of 4 areas, I think, where this movement, if you like, this sector can gain traction and it can be more effective. One is around replication. And one of the things we've found as we've developed our work over the last couple of years is that we've let 1,000 flowers bloom. We've invested in a range of different initiatives which have been focused on parliamentary monitoring, on freedom of information, on service delivery and so on. But many of them have had the same kind of roots. They've had the same kind of code base. They've had the same kind of objectives. And one of the things we're quite keen on doing is looking at where there may be opportunities to pool resources, to share ways in which these apps and these websites could be advanced and could be replicated more easily. One of the things we've one of the things we find encouraging, of course, is the community that has emerged around this, and this is through hackathons, through app contests, through a range of different opportunities for people working together scrappily in garages and so on. And that's the beauty of this community. But often we find that things are being replicated, and there are ways or things are being reinvented again and again. And one of the things we're looking for is ways in which we can shortcut that, which we can share expertise with an investment in human capital, and which we can try and get people working together more effectively. One good example of this is the work that's been done by My Society, an organisation based in the UK, and you'll hear from Paul Lentz later on today. What they've been effective in doing is sharing the expertise they have in parliamentary monitoring sites in different parts of the world. This is an example in Kenya called Mazalendo, which when we introduced My Society to them a couple of years ago was a pretty kind of scrappy affair. It was run by 2 people part-time, it wasn't being properly maintained, and it wasn't really delivering the kind of service it should be doing, which was around monitoring the effectiveness of parliamentarians and being able to kind of monitor what was happening within the Kenyan government. I think My Society have benefited from working with Mazalendo themselves, because I think that's given them an opportunity to revisit their code base, to go back to basics, and to look at kind of rebuilding their site, and then use that experience for other sites as well. Another example is a group in India called Janagraha, which has developed a site called I Paid a Bribe, which is a way of actually monitoring, getting people to report on where they've been solicited for bribes and where people have asked them to provide money for services and so on. Now, there's lots of critiques about this particular approach, whether it's elitist, whether there's sufficient feedback loops in place in order that government then takes action as a result of these kind of bribe reporting. But one thing that's sure is that this particular site has been copied, it's been replicated, and it's been adopted in about 15 other countries around the world. And that for us is a good sign, is that sharing, that expertise, that building of a community around these particular tools is something we want to look for. Now, I'm not saying there should be a monopoly. I'm not saying that My Society or Sunlight or ePanswo or anybody else has all the answers, but I think there are many resources that can be saved, and we can move the sector forward much more quickly by more effectively pooling resources. Second area is around working with government as well as working against government. And this is difficult. I appreciate that many people who are involved in this sector, part of the motivation that they got involved was born out of frustration and anger about the slowness or ineffectiveness of government and the way in which they weren't being responsive to citizens. So this is not to argue that we should all pack our bags and not be critical and say that we should be working only with government and not against it. That's not it at all. But however, for many, I suspect there's also a motivation that we want to improve government. We want to improve the services that they deliver. We want them to adhere to the rule of law, and we want to get them to show high standards of integrity in all the work that they do. And we've talked a little over the last day or so in a session we had yesterday about the Open Government Partnership. And I won't repeat an explanation of what the Open Government Partnership is. But for us, we see this as an opportunity. It is a voluntary coalition. It is 58 governments that have come together with civil society organisations to move forward the sector in terms of openness, release of data, transparency, accountability, freedom of information, and so on. So for us, this is a unique moment in time. There is international political pressure behind it. There's support both from the White House, from the UK government, but then also beyond the usual suspects from Brazil, from Indonesia, from the Philippines, from Mexico, and so on. And it is a unique coalition of civil society organisations and government representatives. And that is something I think that needs to be encouraged and needs to be developed. Now, as well as the relatively low entry requirements, the key to this is about having robust national action plans that can be monitored by an independent reporting mechanism, and where governments can have their feet held to the fire if they don't make progress on those national action plans. And for that, for us, is the opportunity we need to cherish and we need to support. Of course, this could all end in terrible failure. It could lead to the kind of capture of civil society organisations. It could be a massive diversion. It could be a waste of time. But we are seeing signs that things are happening. Brazil, under the President Rousseff, had the political cover provided by OGP to force through the first freedom of information law that had been stuck in the Senate for many years. In the Philippines, there's been great movement made towards participatory budgeting as a result of the Open Government Partnership. And here within this region in Serbia, there's also been whistleblower protection bills that have been passed as well. So it has stimulated unprecedented discussion and focus on this topic. And it's the start of some silo-busting activities, which again we're keen to see. So try and get people within the transparency and accountability movement working towards common aims. So we want to see this emerge as a movement rather than as a set of particular interests around budget transparency or extractive industries or whatever. So there is momentum. We should support it. We should be critical, but we should still support it. And for those, if there's anyone here from the government of Poland, you should really think carefully about why Poland is not part of OGP. As a leading country within the region, with one of the largest populations, with one of the more advanced economies, it is incumbent on Poland to join the Open Government Partnership and to show leadership in this sector as well. Two more points. One, very brief, is about an obvious one, which is about working with media. We should be thinking about how we can work more effectively with allies within independent and particularly citizen-led media as well. It's an obvious point. But as well as being able to use the technology to aggregate information about budgets, about freedom of information requests and so on, we also need to use media in order to amplify these issues, in order to get out to a wider audience beyond those who are gathered within this room and gathered within these relatively small communities as well. And finally, we also need to build an ecosystem as well. One of the things we need to do is to try and break out of silos, to get those policy, those NGOs who are working on policy issues and have expertise, whether it's around extractive industries, whether it's around fiscal transparency, working with people who are adept at technology as well. So we see this as an important part of moving the sector forward. There's got to be the bridge building that happens between those who have the expertise on policy and those who have the skills in technology to try and scale and to break this out as well. One of the things we have seen be reasonably successful is the development of the technology hubs. And I've given an example, an infographic here from Africa, where you've seen these mushroom in the last couple of years, starting with the iHub in Kenya, the co-creation lab in Nigeria, and a range of others. So you now have 20 or 30 centres of expertise which are run by the community. These are not run by universities, they're not run by government. They're run by technology activists, people who are working on civic issues and people who are gathering together the community to work on improvements in the way in which you can use technology to open up government and to get greater transparency and accountability. So finally, 4 calls for action. One is about pooling resources, sharing expertise, making sure that we're not reinventing the wheel at every single hackathon and app contest and so on. Is there some way in which within this region you can have a way of actually more effectively sharing resources across different countries? Secondly, working with governments. Try and find the champions and the reformers within government who can really move this sector forward. And for Poland, join Open Government Partnership. Thirdly, work with media, see them as allies, see them as ways in which you can amplify some of the initiatives and some of the issues which we care about. And finally, the brightest and best who are concerned about these issues are here in this room. There should be a better way in which you can communicate, in which you can work across national boundaries, in which out of this you can build your own network as well. And if this is part of building a movement for transparency and accountability, it's a bit like the green movement or the women's movement or the human rights movement. It's about bringing people together out of their silos and working towards a common aim. My colleague Martin was telling somebody last night that one of his dreams is to see a movement for accountability within his lifetime. And I said to this person, well, firstly, Martin is a very young guy, so I would hope that we'd be able to do this within my lifetime because I'm a lot older than him. But one of the things we do want to do is to make momentum on this quickly and to make sure that we grab the opportunity that's been provided by some of these international movements with Open Government Partnership and others and really start to see a movement emerge over the next couple of years. Thank you.